failure is one of those things that is kind of a dirty word. People get embarrassed about it. But honestly, the more things you do, the more failure you'll have. So if you follow that food tips natural conclusion, if you want to be successful, you have to be a failure because you've got to try things. And it was really nice in many of the episodes. Lots of high-profile dentists who are doing really well today opened up about things that hadn't quite gone right for them in the early days. So I think accepting that not everything's going to go well is a good thing.
Most dentists aren't trained to run businesses, let alone scale them. This is the TechDental Podcast for dental leaders who want more than just tips. We give you systems, strategies, and straight answers. I'm Dr. Randeep, and each week I sit down with the operators, AI founders, entrepreneurs, and business leaders who are reshaping what's possible in dentistry. If you want a smarter, scalable, future-proof practice, then this is the podcast for you. Today, we are lucky enough to have a guest that has been at the forefront of the business side of dentistry for almost 3 decades. As director of Frank Taylor & Associates, he's helped countless dentists buy, sell, and grow their practices. He's also a highly respected voice in the profession, having co-hosted over 200 episodes of the Dentology podcast, and he's been a mentor and guide to many in the industry. In this conversation, we'll explore how AI and the emerging technology are changing the rules from boosting practice valuations to streamlining day-to-day operations, and what every practice owner needs to know to stay ahead. Let's give a big TechDental welcome to today's guest, Andy Acton. Great to have you on the show, Andy.
Thank you very much, Randy. That when you said nearly 3 decades, I'm like, oh, that hurts. It makes me sound like an old duffer. And we're going to be talking about AI and tech and this old bloke.
Well, Andy, let's start at the beginning. Looking back over your career in dentistry, what do you see as the biggest shifts in how practices are bought, sold, and grown?
It's a really interesting space. In many ways, so much has changed, and in many ways, so much hasn't changed. And the bit that hasn't changed, it's still a people business. It's still about people making connections, frontline teams working with patients delivering dentistry. So that bit is standard, consistent, always been there. The bit that's changing massively is younger dentists are way more tuned in to the business side of dentistry than they ever were. And I think there's more of an entrepreneurial spirit. I think there's definitely something being handed down from parents to children that perhaps wasn't there before. And I think that's probably a recognition of the diverse culture we have across dentistry now, which has made it easier for younger people to get in on the business side of things. But we still have an issue in that it's not taught in dental school. So young dentists need to go and seek business skills themselves. And my point on that is that people say, well, why would you need to understand anything about business? You're a dentist. But even as an associate, you're a self-employed business person. You're still working the practice as a self-employed person. You earn your own money. You're accountable for your own tax. You need to make yourself desirable to that practice you're working in. So if you can, generate patients off your own back, that will make you more useful. If you're able to assist the principal with marketing campaigns or helping to manage their team, whatever it might be, it makes you a more valuable person. And these are non-clinical skills. So I think from that side of things, I think it's still there's a gap still, but it is getting better. And what that means from a buying and selling point of view is that we have a much more informed community than we had before, and people wanting to enjoy the journey of ownership. Historically, people bought practices because that was just the natural next step. You qualified, you're an associate, you bought a practice, you retired. That was kind of the pathway. Whereas now we've seen people leaning into the business side of dentistry and really enjoying it too.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I'll second that. There's not much in dental school in terms of kind of business and finance and accounting knowledge, and it's a shame really because you're trained to be an amazing clinician, which is obviously the kind of the forefront, but those business skills go hand in hand. From hosting 200 plus episodes of Dentology, what challenges and opportunities came up again and again for owners? I mean, what patterns did you start to see? Were there certain questions or themes that kept arising?
Yeah, I think interestingly, something that came out quite strongly from lots of people is accepting failure. And through the episodes that we did, we had some people that failed a year at dental school, We had some people who didn't get the grade, so they studied overseas. We had people that had issues with the GDC, and in their interpretation, they felt there was a failure of sorts on their side. So I think failure is one of those things that is kind of a dirty word. People get embarrassed about it. But honestly, the more things you do, the more failure you'll have. So if you follow that through to its natural conclusion, if you want to be successful, you have to be a failure because you've got to try things. And it was really nice in many of the episodes. Lots of high-profile dentists who are doing really well today opened up about things that hadn't quite gone right for them in the early days. So I think accepting that not everything's going to go well is a good thing. The other thing that came out very strongly is just how lonely dentistry is as a profession, more so as an owner than as an associate. But as an owner, it's a very lonely place to be because you own your practice. Everybody in the business assumes you know everything there is to know about business, so they're coming to you for answers all the time. You probably have a life outside of dentistry, a partner, a husband, a wife, a partner. So you don't necessarily want to always lean on them because, you want to have a life away from the dental practice. And what that creates is this environment where, particularly for business owners, they feel quite lonely and they don't really have many places to go to be supported from a community aspect where there's other people like you. And that was something that came out quite strongly. The other bit that surprised me, but it doesn't when you think about it, is how creative dentists are. We had musicians, artists, singers, rappers, break dancers, creative writers. We had this real mixed bag of creativity. And when you think where we are in dentistry, at the aesthetic end of dentistry, there's a real creativity that goes with producing these beautiful smiles. But it did take me by surprise to start with how many dentists had a non-dental creative streak to their lives.
That's a really amazing distinction, because you don't really appreciate that, from kind of day to day. But yeah, someone like yourself is really kind of pick the brains of so many dentists and owners. It's lovely you say that because I see that with my own colleagues. I mean, somebody's an artist, somebody has a music background, and I think it really helps with the dentistry side of things as well. So, I mean, if you had to sum up one constant truth, and you may have touched on this already in terms of the people side of the business, but about the dental business over all these years, what one constant would it be? Forgetting all the technology out there, and we'll come on to that in a moment.
Manage people well. I think if you have the skill and you can develop the skill to manage people well, you're on the right track. Because I think if you can lead well, and for that you need to have a vision because people need to know where they're going and what they're following. I think if you can lead people well and manage people well, it's amazing. Everything else kind of falls into place. If you're in business, you're in the people business. Whatever you do, you're in the people business. And if you can get a team pointing the direction you want them to go, and you can build a good culture, most other things fall into place. And bear in mind that many dentists and particularly principals are going to be locked away in their surgery probably a minimum of 3 days a week. So you're not visible to have input to your business and manage it because you're one-to-one with your patient. So you need to have an environment within your business where your team completely and utterly understand what's important and they deliver that vision for you. So being good with people and being a good leader is for me, is the critical skill to master. And I don't think that's just as an associate or as a dentist owning a practice. I think generally in life, if you understand people, life gets easier because, it's just more enjoyable as well. But it does require work. You do need to understand quite a lot about yourself. There needs to be a reasonable amount of self-awareness. And then you need to understand what leading people well and managing people looks like. So you have a team who are absolutely tight in terms of following what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's a fantastic perspective. And as I say, culture is king. Culture is king. Andy, in terms of buying and selling of practices has always been a numbers game, but technology and AI in particular seem to be changing or rewriting some of the rules. How do you see AI influencing practice valuations and shaping what both buyers and sellers are looking for today and in the future?
I think we're still really early on in AI influencing business values. the noise and the chatter around AI is extraordinary at the moment. You can't jump on a social media feed without seeing a new solution, somebody quoting data, an incredible video, a business talk. The proliferation of new initiatives is mind-blowing, and you can't keep up. It's too fast. But if we take it back to dentistry and the value of a dental practice, ultimately the value of a dental practice is represented as a multiple of the underlying profit in the business. So AI has the potential to make a dental practice more efficient. And if you can improve the efficiency of a dental practice, and in terms of efficiency here, I would say reducing cost, that will improve the profitability of that business. The smart people are going to see how they can use AI to release their amazing team to spend more time with their patients. And I think that's the smart way of approaching AI. I think people who are looking to automate systems, processes, have chatbots, have automated reception, put people into a sequence and a program and a system, I don't think that's going to work. I think if I'm ordering some food from Deliveroo, I'm cool with that. It's just a transaction. I'm not that fussed about it. I can live with that. We've been moved into a position where we're all very comfortable using technology in that way. I think if we lose the human aspect of dentistry and we move into a space where it becomes fully automated, I think those practices are going to suffer. So I think the sweet spot is looking at what AI is out there that you can use to improve the efficiency in your practice, but don't see it as a people replacement system. It should be a people release system, and it should release people to spend more high value time with your patients. Because I always believe that within business, there's only two things you can really play with to improve the value. You either increase income or you reduce costs. And you can only ever reduce costs so far. And I think at the moment, AI is being seen as a tool to reduce costs. And my only word of caution to people is just be really careful. You don't squeeze that lemon too hard, because if you reduce costs too far and it becomes fully automated, something will be lost in the patient experience. However, what you may be able to do is reduce cost a bit to free up your team, who can spend more time with patients and might convert more treatment. So you actually see an increase in income against a slight reduction in costs by using AI. And I think that's where it will have the impact on practice values.
Yeah, I'm hearing that a lot. You use it as a bit of a co-pilot, but really free up the humans. I like that. Have you coined that term? Was it? Did you say replacement? Human replacement? Or
yeah,
I like that. So yeah, and I completely agree with that. I think it'll be a shame to lose the human touch in such a people-oriented business. And yeah, at the moment, it's kind of like the early days of the internet, a little bit Wild West. There's so much out there, and it's hard to really pick through that.
And I think it will take a while for people to work it out. I think normally what happens is when anything new comes along, the old barometer swings too far one way before it comes back. And I think we could see people doing in 6 months, a year, they could look back and go, that was a bit stupid. Why are we doing that? I think that's just the nature of where we are. I think the reality is you need to embrace AI. I think it's come in. I think it's going to stick around. But rather than just see it as being a threat and just assuming that you can just prompt ChatGPT for everything in your life, it's more than that. It's about really understanding your systems and processes and how you integrate it. But I think the next year or so is going to be a very interesting period.
Yeah, it definitely seems like something's in the air. Andy, if someone plans to sell in the next 3 to 5 years, how important is it to invest in digital infrastructure and data-led systems now? And which particular systems would you say are really vital at the moment, bearing in mind what you said about there's a lot of noise and hype around things?
I think 3 to 5 years is the perfect window to start thinking about your exit. The truth is that most people come to a guy like me 6 months before they want to sell. And that looks like valuation, we find a buyer, they sell. The window to make any changes in that is very slim indeed, which for me is a little bit frustrating. A 3 to 5 year window is much better. And interestingly, on the 3 to 5 year window, there's evidence around it takes between 2 and 5 years for us as humans to make big decisions. And a big decision would be buying a business, having a family, moving house, getting married, those sorts of decisions, we actually ruminate on these for a lot longer than we think. So the 3 to 5 year window is a fascinating time frame, because actually the thought and the seed has probably already been planted in the practice owner. But if they do come to somebody like me with a 3 to 5 year window, what I can do is I can look at their business and see how optimized it is and how exit ready they are, because it may well be that business is still heavily reliant on the principal. And through that 3 to 5 year window, you can put in place systems to make sure that practice isn't so heavily dependent on the principal. And that normally falls into 2 camps. That's clinical and from a management perspective. And very often, lots of the day-by-day management is still with the principal. But if you're able to transition that either to automated systems and processes or have other people in the practice helping, that can be great, because then when a buyer comes in, they're not looking and going, well, this is great, but you do everything. I still need you around. And actually, one of the primary reasons for people wanting to sell is so they're no longer around and they want to leave. But if all those decisions come through you, that's quite challenging. And then the second part is many practices very often have the majority of the clinical fees being generated by the principal. And again, if you can put in place a system of therapists, hygienists, associates, so it isn't so dependent on you, that would be a good thing. There will be a short-term impact on profit by doing that, because your associate and your therapist and hygienist costs are going to increase. But it does mean that when that time comes for you to sell, it will be easier for you to transition out. That point really only is applicable where principals are grossing more than about £350,000 to £400,000 in a year. If they're at that level or below, it's not so much of an issue. I think if you did those things in the run-up, you would then be way more exit ready than perhaps some of the people that I see.
So 3 to 5 years, that's the sweet spot. That's kind of like the key.
Yeah. For me, it'll be, and on that, I've actually just developed a program, which is the owner fatigue program, and that links with that, because what I'm seeing is most people that own a practice, they get to about 9 to 10 years into ownership, and they just feel fed up, and they can't quite articulate what it is, but it tends to fall into one of 5 categories. It's either emotional load, I can't switch off. It's lifestyle misalignment, which is I'm either always at the practice, or if I'm not at the practice, I'm at home. And if I'm at home, I feel guilty about not being at the practice. You then have decision fatigue, where you're just being asked every day hundreds of questions, and you literally get worn out by making decisions. You then have role creep, which is when I signed up for owning a practice, I didn't think I was going to have to do these 50 different things. How did my job get so big? And then the last bit is a bit we've just been talking about, which is the exit readiness. And where people are in that kind of 9 to 10 year window, if they haven't done any pre-thinking about it, they may be in ownership for another 3 to 5 years. Whereas if they start to think about it a bit sooner, it's an excellent opportunity to get their business ready. And I always have this thing about prepare your business for sale is different from selling your business. It should always be ready for sale. So yeah, I think 3 to 5 years is a great window.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that story several times, and it goes back to what you said about the isolation aspect as well, and that compounds everything. In terms of, you talked about the business pressures. Moving on with that theme, I mean, where do you think at the moment, a technology like AI could have the biggest impact in reducing the day-to-day non-clinical workload? Maybe freeing up, as you mentioned, the principal, do the more kind of human and vision orientated and strategy work for the business and growing the business.
I think there's 2 areas it can work in. I think it can be used to make dental practice a 24-hour service, and I think they could provide access to their patients to their practice on a 24-hour basis. So they can dial in. There'll be a chat, and I think they'll get to a stage where they'll be able to get some very basic information and advice based on good prompting and good use of AI. So I think whereas at the moment, I still see lots of dental practices, they're open 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and we shut for lunch between 1 and 2. That is, to me, that's a 1980s style dental practice. So I think you could immediately expand your offering to patients by using AI. And that's been in place. We've all been very used to using automated telephony systems for a long while. That is a really simple, easy entry point. And I think the next side to it, on the business side, would be using AI to interrogate your financial data and report information in terms of how you're doing. I think that one at the moment is a bit of a double-edged sword, because principals are getting much better at understanding their financial data than they have before. The challenge with using AI to producing financial data is it's what you then do with it. And nobody's sitting around with 2 hours spare a day. Everyone's busy. So if you use AI to produce this financial data and you get financial reports that land on your desk, what are you going to do with it? When are you going to find the time to do something with it? So I would at the moment look for patient experience improvements unless you have capacity to act on the financial information you receive. Because if you receive it and you do nothing with it, arguably that actually might lead to more stress, because now you feel you've got access to this data, but you've not got the time to do anything with it. So that could be a stressful situation. So I would only start to use the financial metrics and look to improve that unless you've either got a partner that can work with you and help you understand it and suggest improvements, or you have the capacity. If you don't have that yet, I'd focus on the patient experience side.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction. So sometimes too much data, too much information, it's counterproductive. And you hit the nail on the head. If you can't act on it, it's another stress, isn't it?
And I think that's where I feel at the moment with AI. I see a lot of people producing, they're amazing systems, and the reports and data they produce, it's genuinely outstanding. But I don't know many principals that have got the time to interpret and work with that data. So I think the next evolution will be the solutions that go with the data. We've kind of gone not knowing stuff. AI can help us know the stuff, but we actually now need the front end solution delivered to us so that there's an improvement. And we're not there yet. We're not far off. I'm involved in some different bits and pieces, and we're very close to having those solutions. But at the moment, we're not there. And I just urge people to be careful not to get buried in data, because that could be more stressful.
Yeah, so that's great advice. And Andy, technology, it's not just about efficiency, it's also a magnet for capital. Let's talk about the investment side. Do you think AI and these kind of advanced analytics systems that you talk about, do you think that will attract more investment into dentistry? And if so, what will investors be looking for? Is there anything different they'll be looking for? Does it go back to the fundamentals?
I think it is a fundamental. I think dentistry is in the medical profession. Medical always has innovation. It's always been a very attractive market for people to invest in. And I think that we're already seeing, some of the very early runners in terms of people who wanted to get technology into their systems. We can go back to looking at people like Align, Sprint Ray, dental monitoring. People have been using tech in clever ways. And I think it's a very attractive market, but also it makes the world smaller, because global companies can get involved very easily across different jurisdictions, and particularly now because most of these services are cloud-based. Whereas historically, you developed a piece of software, it sat on someone's server. That was kind of a very local way of working. Whereas if you have something now which sits in the cloud, and say it was developed using English as its primary language, there's no reason why that service couldn't be exported across the world. And we've already seen that with some software systems, that they're starting to be deployed in English-speaking countries. But I think it also applies in reverse. If we have people in the UK who are developing really clever solutions, the world is their oyster. They can take that global as a cloud-based solution very quickly. And I think from an investment point of view, that opens the UK up to a larger audience as well, because we've always been great at innovation. We've always been, go back to the Industrial Revolution. We're great at that kind of, the engineering and the finding new ways of doing things. And perhaps we're just in that new phase, but from an AI perspective.
Yeah, no, I definitely think it opens things up. And interesting takeaway about kind of making the world smaller place in terms of getting everybody together and getting your products out there. And if you could give some advice to, say you had a practice owner and they want to scale from say 1 to 2, 3, 4, 5 practices, what piece of advice would you give them? What's the best scaling strategy? And Could you give an example of maybe the boldest scaling strategy that you've seen in the last 5 years?
Yeah, so I think it depends kind of how far you want to go. If you want to scale from 1 to 2, you could reasonably do that just as a principal managing 2 separate dental practices. You can kind of, you start to spread yourself a little bit thin, but you can do 2. If you're going to go beyond that and you have a strategy to do that, as opposed to you just randomly start buying individual practices when it suits you, I think you need to invest in your infrastructure quite early on. So very often what happens, where people end up with multiple practices, it ends up looking a little bit like an inverted pyramid. So you have the point at the bottom and then these practices built on top of it. And ideally, it should look like a pyramid. It should have a much larger base. And then you add those practices on top. But that does require you to invest in good systems, probably end up with disproportionate people costs in the early days, because you may need a business manager as opposed to a practice manager. And you may need to release you from some of your clinical work to grow the business. And those things are going to impact on your profits. However, if you're doing a 5-year, 10-year plan, you might need to accept that in the shorter term, you won't be as profitable, but in the longer term, it's going to work. I think the 2 that stand out for me that are incredible success stories, they're both slightly different. There's Anushka Brogan, who has Demira dental practices, and she's been very open about her history. And she built a group of practices, and then she went through a divorce and lost everything. And now she's back to 42 practices. She is an incredibly focused person on what she's trying to achieve, but not in a badass business way. She's still very personable. Her team are absolutely adored by her. She has this beautiful balance of being a great business leader and executing her vision immaculately, but also not forgetting that there's people involved in business and creating an environment and culture for them. So I think she's a great example for people to look at in terms of what she's achieving. And then another one that stands out for me is Kunal Patel at Love Teeth. And the reason that he stands out, and it also really applies to Kunal Thakur at Tooth Club as well, in that they've done it by growing squats. And that is not easy at all. The capital investment in creating a squat at the front end is not as much as buying a practice, but it's more painful in the sense that you need to make all the expenditure with zero revenue, and then that revenue starts to come in. But what it does mean, in both of those cases, they completely and utterly control the brand. So all of their sites all look the same, they behave the same, their team have all been trained in a very similar way to a certain pattern. So there's some examples of you can do it in different ways. None of them are easy. These people are truly outstanding. They make it look simple. And when they tell their story, it sounds easy. I know the hard work that goes on in the background to achieve it. And all of them are outstanding business people.
Great examples. I mean, all of those stories are really, really powerful. And yeah, I know their stories well. And you're right. People see the outside results, but they often forget the decades and decades of hard work and sacrifice.
I was going to say, it's that classic thing, isn't it? It took me 20 years to be an overnight success. People don't see the hard yards that go on in the background.
And let's zoom out a little bit now and kind of think long term. What's your vision for the next decade look like with everything that's going on with technology and AI? I mean, how do you envision that helping both the operational efficiency side of practice ownership and the patient experience over the next decade?
I think from a patient experience point of view, I think that ball's already rolling. I think we're already seeing some amazing technology being deployed in practices. I mentioned dental monitoring. I think the work that Loven's doing at chairside with patient education, I think we're already in that phase where there's some really exciting things to come. And I think that's going to continue to happen. I think potentially in the short term, I think that the tech is going to almost push a bit too far, and we might lose some of the deep and meaningful relationship side of the patient experience. But I'm confident that will swing back again. I think from an ownership point of view, I think this starts to level the playing field a little bit. The corporate narrative has been it's really hard to own a dental practice in today's world. You can't do it. You need us to help you. It's getting more and more difficult. It's getting more and more expensive. I think the time is coming for independent dental practices to thrive. I think by leveraging technology that wasn't affordable or available as an independent practice level is now there. So I think that the skills you require and the resources you require have actually been diluted slightly. And that means that it's going to be easier to run a practice more successfully than it has in the past, because some of this tech is now available to you, which historically might have only been available to some of the bigger players. So I think we're going to go into a renaissance period where for the next 10 years, I think independent practice ownership is going to be a very exciting place to be. And I genuinely believe from a culture point of view, where you go into practice that has a principal on site, it looks, feels and behaves differently to a corporate environment. And that's not just a dental thing. You know, if you go into a chain style restaurant, even a nice chain style restaurant, it will not feel the same as your local Italian restaurant where Piero comes out because he lives and he breathes it and he molds the dough with his hands and he produces this amazing garlic bread. That is a very hard thing to repeat at a corporate level. And I think if independent owners tune into that, I think they're going to do really well.
I love that renaissance period. I love it. Well, that's really nice. And Andy, before we wrap up, I always like to do like a little quick fire round just to kind of get it, get some nuggets from yourself here for our listeners. Can you recommend one book that's completely rewired how the way you think about business? Anything that you could recommend?
I recently read Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara. And I think that from an experience and a service point of view, that book was absolutely outstanding. I think Atomic Habits by James Clear, the power of consistency, of doing small things regularly, it is probably the one that resonated with me the most. As a business person, as you are, we need to be good at lots of things, not outstanding at one thing. And that's quite challenging for many dentists, because you go through dental school as you did, Randy, and you spend 5 years doing a very specific thing. So you are ill-equipped for business in the early days, because you've niched down on this very specific technical, scientific application of dentistry. Whereas I need to be good at lots of different things. And what James Clear told me in Atomic Habits is being consistent at doing lots of those different things well works really well. Another one that I thought was really good was Ride of a Lifetime by Bob Iger, who was the CEO of the Walt Disney Corporation. He's actually come back in again. But I think if I had to pick one, I'd probably go with Atomic Habits and James Clear.
Yeah, no, that I haven't read the other two, but yeah, Atomic Habits I have. And you've kind of answered my next quick fire question, which was one habit that's quietly powered your progress. So could I safely say it's consistency, or would you like to add another one?
100% consistency. That's the thing that I make sure that I show up. I make sure that I deliver. If I commit to producing content for social media, I do it on a regular basis. In my own life, I try to exercise regularly. I just obsess about doing small things regularly, and I don't tend to flip flop on things. If I do something, I commit to it, and I build it into my routine. And that building it into your routine is so critical. If it's not easy to do, you will stop doing it at some point. So for me, I swim quite regularly. And when I arrive at my office, every day that I go to my office, I always book a swim, and then I go to the pool and I swim, and that's just my routine. And one of my habits is when I arrive at my office, I book to swim. You don't need to book anymore. That was an overhang from COVID. But the purpose of booking is it's an appointment, it's a commitment, and I'll do it. So yeah, consistency. If you can crack consistency, I think lots of things get easier for you.
I love that. And finally, if you could shadow one entrepreneur, past or present, you could shadow for a day, who would you choose and why?
I think I'd shadow Walt Disney. I think now it's easy to look at where that business is, and it's kind of it's cartoons, but when you kind of go back to the very beginning, back in the 50s, and you look at what he was doing, the funfair experience, that hospitality didn't really exist. And the way he went about it, and the audaciousness of what he was trying to do, and the fact he risked everything for it. And I genuinely think that the way that we approach service generally actually has a lot to do with some of those foundation blocks that Walt Disney put in place those years ago. And there's a great guy, a marketeer in the US, a guy called Dan Kennedy. You'd probably be familiar with him. But he says everybody should go to Disney twice a year, once for a holiday, and the second time just to watch how they deliver their service. And we're all in the service industry. And I think understanding what it is to be of service to people is really important. There's nothing demeaning about giving service. It's something that we should be really proud about. And I think that he sparked that flame all those years ago. And I think lots of us have got to be very grateful for the fact that we pride ourselves on giving good service. So yeah, it'd be amazing to have followed him for a day.
I love that. That's absolutely fantastic. Andy, for anyone who wants to learn more, from buying or selling a practice to joining your Principals Club community, where's the best place for them to connect with you?
So either on Instagram or LinkedIn. Those are probably the easiest and quickest ways to get through to me. And if people have questions, reach out to me. I'm a big believer that dentistry is a community, and that's kind of partly why we sort of have started the Principals Club for practice owners to be part of that community. But it is lonely. We've talked about loneliness, and if I can help answer a question or give somebody some direction or information that might make something make sense, I'd be very happy to do that. So yeah, people are very welcome to reach out to me. But like I say, Instagram and LinkedIn are the places that I spend most time.
Perfect. We'll make sure all those links are in the show notes so people can reach out. And Andy, thank you once again for sharing your experience and ideas today. I think a lot of practice owners will be walking away from this episode with a much clearer sense of what the next move for their practice really should be in this kind of noise and hype era of AI and technology. You've been listening to the TechDental Podcast, building the practice of tomorrow today and helping you create smarter, stronger, future-ready dentistry. Until next time, stay curious, think big. Thank you, Andy.
Cheers, Randy.
Scaling a business isn't a dream, it's a decision. This is the TechDental Podcast. And if you found value today, follow, share, and subscribe. This is the edge every dental leader needs.